A 72-year-old barefoot man reaches into his tattered coat and pulls out a handful of crumpled bills. Every dollar he owns in this world. He lays them on the counter one by one for a Hell's Angel he's never met, while the entire store watches in silence. The biker's eyes fill with tears. The cashier's hand freezes mid-reach for the phone. And somewhere in the back, a teenager holds up a phone, recording a moment that will bring 300 motorcycles thundering down this street by morning. Subscribe to our channel and follow this incredible story to the very end. Drop a comment telling us what city you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel. The fluorescent light above aisle 3 flickered twice and died. Walter Brennan didn't notice. His eyes stayed fixed on the scene unfolding at the checkout counter, where a man twice his size stood, with his head bowed like a child caught stealing from the collection plate. The biker's name was Colt McRae, though Walter wouldn't learn that until later. Right now, all he saw was a wall of leather and patches, a basket full of bread and milk and insulin syringes, and a card that kept flashing red every time the cashier ran it through. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to step aside." The cashier's voice carried that particular tone Walter knew too well, the one people used when they'd already made up their minds about who you were and what you deserved. "Just run it again," Colt's voice cracked around the edges. "There's money in there. I checked this morning. I've run it 4 times, then run it a 5th. The line behind him shifted. Walter counted 7 people, all wearing the same expression. Impatient, suspicious, ready to believe the worst about a man they'd never spoken a single word to. A woman near the frozen foods leaned toward her husband. She didn't whisper quietly enough. "Probably stole that card anyway. Look at him." Colt's shoulders stiffened. His hands, massive and scarred across the knuckles, curled into fists at his sides. But he didn't turn around. Didn't say a word. Just stood there absorbing the judgment like a man who'd learned long ago that fighting back only made things worse. "Sir?" The cashier reached for the phone mounted on the wall beside the register. "I'm going to have to call my manager. I'm not stealing anything." Colt's voice dropped, low, dangerous. "I'm trying to buy groceries for my mother. She's diabetic. She needs that insulin tonight. That's not my problem." Walter watched the cashier's finger hover over the first button. He watched security step closer, a young man barely out of high school trying to look tough in a uniform 2 sizes too big. He watched the people in line pull out their phones, already composing the story they'd tell at work tomorrow. And something broke loose inside his chest. Something that had been sleeping for 12 years under the weight of his own shame and silence. "Hold on." His voice came out rusty, unused to being raised above a mumble, but it was loud enough to stop the cashier's hand mid-dial. "Sir, this doesn't concern you." "I'm making it my concern." Walter stepped forward. His bare feet slapped against the cold tile floor, and he heard the sharp intake of breath from the woman near the frozen foods. He saw the way people stepped back, creating distance between themselves and the homeless man, who smelled like laundromat exhaust and 3 days without a shower. Let them step back. He'd stopped caring about what people thought of him a long time ago. "How much?" Walter asked. The cashier blinked. "Excuse me, the groceries. How much does he owe?" "Sir, I didn't ask what you think. I asked how much. $47.63. Walter reached into his coat. The lining was torn, and his fingers had to dig through 2 holes before finding the pocket where he kept his money. Such as it was. He pulled out a handful of crumpled bills. Singles, mostly. A few 5s worn so soft they felt like cloth. Coins he'd collected from the sidewalk outside the bar on 5th Street. Everything he had. He smoothed each bill against the counter, counting under his breath. 42, 45, 47. He added the coins one by one until the total sat there between him and the cashier, like a small paper monument to everything he'd lost and everything he still believed in. $47.70. 7 cents more than enough. There. Walter pushed the money across the counter. Now ring him up. The silence that followed was absolute. Colt turned slowly, his eyes gray as storm clouds, and twice as troubled, moved from Walter's weathered face down to his bare feet and back up again. Whatever he'd expected from tonight, it wasn't this. "Old man," he said quietly, "I can't take your money." "You're not taking it. I'm giving it. That's everything you got." Walter shrugged. A small movement, barely a lift of his shoulders, but it carried the weight of every meal he'd missed and every night he'd spent shivering behind the laundromat. "Money comes and goes," he said. "A man's dignity is harder to replace. I learned that the hard way." Colt shook his head. "You don't know me." "Don't need to. I could be exactly what they think I am." He jerked his chin toward the people behind them, still watching, still recording. "I could be every bad thing that Vest makes them believe." "Are you?" The question hung in the air between them. Colt's jaw tightened. For a moment, Walter saw something flash behind those storm-gray eyes. Pain. Anger. A loneliness so deep it could drown a man if he let it. "No," Colt said finally. "I'm not." "Then that's all I need to know." The cashier still hadn't moved. Her hand still hovered near the phone, her eyes darting between the two men like she was watching a bomb being assembled, and couldn't decide whether to run or stay. "Ma'am," Walter's voice hardened. "I believe I just paid for these groceries. You want to ring them up, or should I call your manager myself and explain why you're refusing legal tender from a paying customer?" Her face flushed red. She looked at the money, looked at Walter, looked at Colt. Then she started scanning items. Her movements quick and jerky, like she wanted to get this whole situation out of her register and out of her sight as fast as possible. Someone in the line laughed. A short, ugly sound. "Would you look at that one bum helping another?" Walter turned. The man who'd spoken was middle-aged, soft around the middle, wearing a polo shirt with some company logo on the breast pocket. The kind of man who'd never missed a meal in his life. The kind who'd never had to choose between medicine and food. The kind who looked at poverty like a moral failing rather than a circumstance. "Something funny?" Walter asked. "Yeah, actually." The man crossed his arms. "Two losers playing hero? That's pretty funny." Walter felt the old anger stirring. The same anger that used to keep him up at night after the fire, after the accusations, after his wife's funeral, when half the town stayed home because they didn't want to be associated with a man the insurance company had labeled a fraud. He'd learned to bury that anger, to let it sleep beneath years of hunger and humiliation. But tonight, standing in this fluorescent-lit store with $47.70 changing hands, like a sacred offering, he couldn't keep it down anymore. "You know what I think is funny?" Walter took a step toward the man in the polo shirt. He didn't raise his voice, didn't clench his fists, just looked at him with eyes that had seen too much and survived anyway. "I think it's funny how quick you are to judge. You see his vest and you see trouble. You see my feet and you see worthless. You probably drove here in a car that cost more than I've earned in the last 10 years combined. You probably got a house with heat and a bed with clean sheets and a refrigerator full of food you'll throw away because you bought too much." The man's smile faltered. "And yet here you stand," Walter continued, "laughing at two men you've never met because one of them had a card that didn't work and the other one didn't have shoes. You want to know what that makes you? I don't have to listen to this. No, you don't. You can walk out that door right now and go back to your life and forget this ever happened. That's your right. But before you go, I want you to answer one question. Walter pointed at Colt, then at himself. If your card stopped working tomorrow, if you lost your job, if everything you'd built came crashing down because someone told a lie and nobody bothered to check if it was true, if you were standing here in our shoes, literally in mine, which one of these people would step up to help you? The man's face had gone pale. He opened his mouth closed. It opened it again. That's what I thought. Walter turned back to the counter. The cashier was bagging the last of the groceries, her hands trembling slightly as she worked. Keep the change, Walter said. Buy yourself something nice. 7 cents. That's what he'd left the store with. 7 cents. And the strange feeling that something had shifted inside him, some gear that had been stuck for 12 years, finally grinding back into motion. Outside, the night air hit him like a wall of cold. His feet, bare and calloused, felt every crack in the asphalt as he walked toward the edge of the parking lot. Hey, old man, wait up. Colt caught up to him near the dumpster's grocery bags, swinging from one massive hand. Up close, he was even bigger than Walter had realized. 6'4" at least, with shoulders that looked like they'd been built for breaking down doors. But his eyes were soft. I don't know how to thank you. Then don't. I'm serious. What you did in there? What I did in there was pay for some groceries. Walter shrugged. It's not exactly storming the beaches at Normandy. It is to me. Something in Colt's voice made Walter stop. He really looked at the younger man for the first time. There were scars on his hands that looked like they came from fights. Old ones faded to white, mixed with newer ones, still pink and healing. There were lines around his eyes that suggested too many sleepless nights. And there was a weariness in the way he held himself that Walter recognized because he saw it every time he caught his reflection in a window. This was a man who'd been beaten down by life and was still standing anyway. Barely. But still. What's your name, son? Colt. Colt McRae. Walter Brennan. They stood there in the yellow glow of the parking lot lights, two strangers who'd just discovered they spoke the same language, the language of men who'd been written off, cast aside, dismissed as worthless by people who'd never bothered to hear their stories. Can I ask you something, Walter? Ask. Why'd you do it? You don't know me. You've got nothing, and you gave it all away for a man you'd never seen before in your life. Colt shook his head. That doesn't make sense. Walter was quiet for a long moment. In the distance, a truck rumbled past on the highway. A dog barked somewhere in the neighborhood behind the store. The world kept turning indifferent as always to the small dramas playing out in grocery store parking lots. 12 years ago, Walter said finally. I owned a furniture shop. Little place on the corner of Main and Harper. Nothing fancy, but it was mine. Built it myself, board by board, customer by customer. Colt didn't interrupt, just listened. One night the whole thing burned down. Electrical fire, they said at first. Then the insurance company got involved and suddenly it wasn't an accident anymore. Suddenly I was a fraud, a criminal, a man who'd burned down his own livelihood for the payout. Were you? What do you think? Colt studied his face. Whatever he saw, there must have been enough. No, he said. You weren't. No, I wasn't. But it didn't matter what I was or wasn't. What mattered was what people believed. And once they believed I was guilty, nothing I said made any difference. Walter's voice dropped low. This was the part he never told anyone. The part that still burned in his chest like an ember that refused to die. I lost everything. The shop, my savings, my reputation. My wife got sick a few months later, and I couldn't afford to keep her in the hospital. Couldn't afford her medication. Couldn't afford to give her the death she deserved instead of the one she got. He swallowed hard. She died thinking I was a failure. Our son stopped talking to me after the funeral, said he couldn't look at me without seeing what I'd cost her. Last I heard, he was living out in California somewhere. Got a family of his own. Probably doesn't even remember he has a father anymore. The silence stretched between them. So, when I saw you standing there tonight, Walter continued, card not working, whole store looking at you like you were something they'd scrape off their shoes, I knew exactly what was about to happen. The whispers, the accusations, the way people turn their backs when they think you're not worth the trouble. He looked up at Colt. Someone should have done that for me, back when it might have made a difference. Someone should have stepped up and said, I don't care what you think you know about this man. I'm going to help him anyway. But nobody did. So tonight I decided to be the someone I never had. Colt was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached out and laid a hand on Walter's shoulder. Heavy, warm. The first human contact Walter had felt in weeks that wasn't someone shoving him out of the way. You're a good man, Walter Brennan. I'm a tired man. Those aren't mutually exclusive. Walter almost smiled. Almost. Go take care of your mother, he said. That insulin won't deliver itself. Colt hesitated. Where will you sleep tonight? Same place I always sleep. Behind the laundromat on 5th. It's not much, but the exhaust vent keeps me warm. That's not right. Maybe not, but it's what is. Colt shook his head slowly. There was something working behind his eyes, some calculation Walter couldn't read. This isn't over, Colt said. What you did tonight, it's not going to just disappear. Don't need it to be anything. Walter started walking toward the street. Just needed it to be done. Walter. He stopped. Turned. Colt stood there with the grocery bags at his feet, the patches on his vest catching the light from the store windows. Hell's Angel. The words were supposed to be a warning, a threat. But right now all Walter saw was a man who'd been saved from humiliation by a stranger's last $47. I don't forget, Colt said. Ever. And neither do my brothers. Walter didn't know what that meant, not yet. But by morning, he would. The walk back to the laundromat took 37 minutes. Walter knew because he'd counted every step since his watch stopped working 2 winters ago. 4,312 steps from the grocery store to the chain-link fence behind the laundromat. Then another 42 around the back to where the exhaust vent pumped warm air into the alley. His spot was still there. The cardboard box he used as a mattress had shifted in the wind, but nobody had claimed it. Small mercies. He settled down against the warm concrete, pulling his coat tighter around his shoulders. His stomach growled, but he'd gone longer than one night without eating. The hunger would pass by morning. He closed his eyes and tried not to think about the look on Colt's face when he'd handed over those bills. The disbelief, the gratitude, the shame of needing help mixed with the relief of receiving it. Walter knew those feelings too well. He'd just never been on the giving end before. Cha-cha-tang. 2 miles away, in a cramped apartment that smelled of eucalyptus oil and old newspapers, Colt McRae set the grocery bags on his mother's kitchen counter and tried to explain what had happened. A homeless man, she repeated. Her name was Dorothy, and she was 76 years old, diabetic, mostly deaf in her left ear, and sharp as a box of tacks. A homeless man paid for all of this. Yes, ma'am. With his own money. Every dollar he had. Dorothy looked at the bread, the milk, the insulin syringes she needed to survive another month. Then she looked at her son, this mountain of a man who'd once broken a pool cue over another man's back to protect her, who'd served 8 years in prison for it, who'd come home to find the world had moved on without him. Why? Colt shook his head. because someone should have done it for him once, and nobody did. Dorothy was quiet for a long moment. Then she reached over and took her son's hand, the same hand that had thrown punches and turned wrenches and held her through the night when the pain got too bad. "You find that man tomorrow," she said. "You find him, and you make sure he knows this family doesn't forget its debts." "Yes, ma'am." "I mean it, Colt. I know you do." She squeezed his hand. Her grip was weaker than it used to be, but her eyes were fierce. "Some people spend their whole lives looking for angels," she said, "and they never think to check under the overpasses and behind the laundromats. You found one tonight. Don't let him slip away." Colt promised. And somewhere across town behind a laundromat on 5th Street, Walter Brennan slept without knowing that his life was about to change, or that 300 motorcycles were already being gassed up for the journey. The video hit the internet at 11:47 p.m. A 19-year-old kid named Marcus Webb uploaded it from the back seat of his mother's Honda, where he'd been waiting while she grabbed a prescription from the pharmacy next door. He'd seen the commotion through the grocery store window, pulled out his phone, and recorded the whole thing without really thinking about why. He titled it simply, "Homeless Man Pays for Biker's Groceries After Store Accuses Him of Theft." By midnight, it had 200 views. By 2 a.m., it had crossed 2,000. And by the time the sun started creeping over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, the video had gone viral. Marcus woke up to 4,700 notifications. The comments section was a war zone. People arguing about bikers. People arguing about homelessness. People arguing about whether the whole thing was staged. People sharing their own stories of being judged, being dismissed, being saved by strangers when no one else would help. But through all the noise, one comment kept getting pushed to the top. It came from an account with a skull and crossbones profile picture and a username that read, "Iron Horse Chapter 7. Does anyone know where this is? We need to find the old man." The replies came flooding in. People who recognized the store. People who knew the town. People pointing to the local news stations that had already picked up the story. And as the morning light spread across the country, something was building. Something that would shake a small Tennessee town to its foundations. 300 engines, 300 leather vests, 300 men who'd all tasted the same bitter judgment that Walter Brennan knew so well. They were coming. And when they arrived, nothing would ever be the same. The phone buzzed against Colt's chest at 5:47 in the morning. He'd barely slept 3 hours lying on the worn couch in his mother's living room, replaying the old man's words over and over in his head. Someone should have done it for me. Nobody did. The number on the screen wasn't one he recognized, but the area code was Nevada, Reno chapter. Yeah, this Ironside Colt sat up slowly. Nobody had called him that name in 8 years, not since before the cell doors closed behind him. "Who's asking?" "Name's Preacher. National chapter. You don't know me, but I know you. And I just watched something on my phone that made me get out of bed at 4 in the morning." Colt's stomach tightened. "What are you talking about?" "The video, brother. The old man in the grocery store. That was you, wasn't it, standing there with your head down while some barefoot homeless guy paid for your groceries with his last dollar?" The words hit like a fist to the chest. "How did you—" "It's everywhere. 2 million views and climbing. Every chapter from here to Maine has seen it by now, and they're all asking the same question." "What question? Who is he, the old man? Who is he, and how do we find him?" Colt was on his feet now, heart pounding against his ribs like it wanted to break free. He moved to the window, pulled back the curtain, half expecting to see a crowd already gathering in the street. Nothing, just the empty parking lot and the first gray light of dawn. "His name's Walter," Colt said quietly. Walter Brennan. He sleeps behind the laundromat on 5th Street. He got family. I don't know. He mentioned a son. Said they haven't talked in years. He got a place to live. Just the street. The line went quiet for a moment. When Preacher spoke again, his voice had changed. Harder. More certain. That's about to change, brother. You understand what I'm telling you? No, I don't. 300 of us are riding out at noon. We'll be there by tomorrow morning. You make sure that old man doesn't disappear before we get there. Wait a minute. Colt pressed the phone harder against his ear. 300. What the hell are you planning to do? What we should have done for every man like him who ever got thrown away by a world that didn't bother to look twice. We're going to give him back what they took. The line went dead. Colt stood there for a long moment, phone still pressed to his ear, trying to make sense of what he'd just heard. 300 bikes. 300 brothers. All of them riding toward a small Tennessee town because a 72-year-old homeless man had handed over his last $47 to a stranger. Colt? His mother's voice came from the bedroom doorway. She was leaning against the frame, one hand pressed to the wall for balance, the other clutching her robe closed at her throat. What's wrong? Who was that? He turned to face her, and for the first time in 8 years, Colt McRae smiled. Mama, you're not going to believe this. The sun was barely over the rooftops when Colt's bike roared to life in the parking lot. His mother had made him eat breakfast, first insisted on it, the way she always did, but he'd barely tasted the eggs and toast. His mind was already 3 miles away behind a laundromat on 5th Street. He had to find Walter before anyone else did. The ride took 7 minutes. He pushed the bike hard through the empty morning streets past the closed storefronts, and the sleeping houses past the church where the early service crowd was just starting to gather. The laundromat came into view, a squat brick building with a faded sign that promised wash and fold same day. The parking lot was empty except for a shopping cart filled with aluminum cans and a pile of cardboard boxes stacked against the back fence. Colt cut the engine and swung off the bike. Walter? No answer. He walked around the side of the building, boots crunching on broken glass and gravel. The exhaust vent was still pumping warm air into the alley, but the spot where Walter had been sleeping the night before was empty. Just a flattened cardboard box and a threadbare blanket. Walter, his voice echoed off the brick walls. A cat bolted from behind a dumpster, disappearing through a gap in the fence. But no Walter. Colt felt something cold settle in his chest. The old man could be anywhere by now. He could have moved on to another spot, another town, another state. Men like him learned to stay mobile, learned that staying in one place too long invited trouble. You looking for the barefoot fellow? The voice came from behind him. Colt spun around. A woman stood at the corner of the building, maybe 60 years old, hair wrapped in a scarf, wearing the kind of work clothes that suggested she'd been up since before the sun. You know him. He comes around sometimes, sweeps up the parking lot for me in exchange for using the bathroom. Good man. Quiet. You seen him this morning? The woman nodded toward the street. He walked off about an hour ago. Headed toward the old industrial district, I think. There's an abandoned factory out there where some of the homeless folks go when the weather turns bad. Which factory? The old furniture plant. It's been closed for years. Just past the railroad tracks on Harper Street. Colt was already moving toward his bike. Thank you, ma'am. Hey. The woman's voice stopped him. Is he in trouble? I saw the news this morning. The video. That was him, wasn't it? The man who paid for the biker's groceries. Yeah, that was him. Then why are you looking for him? You the biker from the video? Colt met her eyes. Yes, ma'am, I am. She studied him for a long moment. Whatever she saw in his face must have satisfied her because she nodded once. "Don't hurt him. He's had enough hurt for one lifetime." "I'm not going to hurt him. I'm going to help him." He fired up the bike and roared out of the parking lot before she could ask any more questions. The old furniture plant sat at the end of Harper Street like a corpse that hadn't had the decency to fall down. The windows were mostly broken, the roof sagged in the middle, and the sign above the main entrance had faded so badly you could barely read the letters anymore. But Colt knew this place. Everyone in town did. It was Brennan's Woodworks. The same shop Walter had owned before the fire took everything. Colt killed the engine and sat there for a moment, staring at the ruins. He'd heard the story last night, heard Walter talk about losing his business and his wife and his son. But seeing it now, in the pale morning light, made it real in a way words couldn't capture. This was where a man's life had ended. And somehow impossibly it was still standing. He found Walter inside. The old man was sitting on an overturned crate near what used to be the main workbench. His back to the door, shoulders hunched beneath his thin coat. He didn't turn around when Colt's boots scraped against the concrete floor. "Figured you'd find me eventually." Colt stopped a few feet behind him. "How'd you know it was me?" "Heard the bike. Nobody else in this town rides one like that." "Why'd you come here?" Walter was quiet for a moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough around the edges. "Habit, I guess. Been coming here for years. Every time I need to remember who I used to be, before everything went wrong." Colt moved around the crate and crouched down in front of him. Walter's eyes were red-rimmed but dry, the kind of grief that had long since run out of tears. "You saw the video," Colt said. It wasn't a question. "Lady at the laundromat showed me this morning. On her phone." Walter shook his head slowly. 2 million people watching me hand over my last dollar. Makes a man feel naked. That's not what they're seeing, Walter. No. What are they seeing? They're seeing someone who did the right thing when nobody else would. They're seeing courage, dignity, the kind of thing people talk about but almost never actually do. Walter snorted. "Courage. Is that what you call it? I call it stupid. Now I got 7 cents to my name and a video following me around for the rest of my life." "That video is going to change your life." "I don't want my life changed." Walter's voice cracked. "I just want to be left alone." Colt reached out and gripped the old man's shoulder. "Too late for that, brother. 300 bikers are heading this way right now. They'll be here by tomorrow morning." Walter's head snapped up. "What? You heard me. 300. From every chapter between here and Nevada. They saw what you did for me, and they're coming to return the favor. I don't understand." "Neither did I at first." Colt sat down on the dusty floor across from Walter, leather vest creaking as he moved. "But here's what I figured out. Men like us, we spend our whole lives being judged. Every time we walk into a room, people decide who we are before we even open our mouths. They see the patches, they see the tattoos, they see the scars, and they think they know everything about us." Walter nodded slowly. He knew that feeling. He'd worn his own invisible patches for 12 years. "But last night," Colt continued, "you showed them something different. You showed them that a man with nothing will still give everything for a stranger. That's the kind of thing that breaks people open, Walter. It makes them want to be better. It makes them want to do something. So they're coming here to what? Shake my hand. Take a picture." "No." Colt's voice dropped low. "They're coming here to rebuild your shop." Then the words hung in the air like smoke. Walter stared at him. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. "That's impossible." "Why, because this place," he gestured at the ruined walls around them. "This place is gone. It's been gone for 12 years. You can't rebuild something that's already dead. Watch us." "You don't understand." Walter's hands were trembling now. "Even if you could fix the building, Even if you could put up new walls and a new roof and new everything, it wouldn't matter. Nobody in this town would set foot inside. They think I'm a crook. They think I burned this place down for the insurance money. That reputation doesn't just go away because some bikers show up with hammers. It does when 300 of us stand beside you and tell them they're wrong. Walter shook his head. The trembling had spread from his hands to his whole body. Why? Why would you do this? Why would any of you do this? Colt leaned forward. Because last night you did something for me that nobody has done in 8 years. You looked at me like I was a human being, not a criminal, not a thug, not an ex-con who couldn't be trusted. You saw me, Walter, the real me, and you helped me anyway. He paused, letting the words settle. Do you know what that's worth to a man who's been invisible his whole life? Walter didn't answer. Couldn't answer. It's worth everything, Colt said, and we pay our debts. The sound of a motorcycle engine cut through the silence. Then another. Then a third. Colt rose to his feet and moved to the broken window. Outside, 3 bikes had pulled into the lot, their riders dismounting with the easy confidence of men who'd spent more years on the road than off it. That's just the scouts, Colt said. The rest will be here by morning. Walter stood slowly, his joints protesting after hours of sitting on the cold crate. He moved to stand beside Colt at the window, watching as more bikes began to appear at the end of the street. 4, 5, 7. Each one carrying a man who'd heard about an old homeless stranger's last $47 and decided it was worth driving through the night to repay. I don't deserve this, Walter whispered. Maybe not, Colt said, but you're getting it anyway. The riders gathered in the parking lot, engines idling patches catching the morning light. One of them, a gray-bearded man with arms like oak branches, swung off his bike and walked toward the building. He stopped at the entrance and looked up at the faded sign. Brennan's Woodworks. Then he turned to face the other riders, his voice carrying clear across the lot. This is the place, brothers. By this time tomorrow it'll be standing again. Who's ready to work? A roar went up from the assembled bikers. Not the polite applause of strangers, but the full-throated battle cry of men who'd found something worth fighting for. Walter felt his knees go weak. Colt caught his arm, steadied him. Easy, old man. This is just the beginning. More bikes were appearing now, streaming in from every direction. The sound of engines built like thunder rolling in from the horizon, growing louder with every passing second. 20 bikes. 30. 50. Each rider carrying tools strapped to their saddlebags. Hammers and saws and drills and bags of nails. They weren't here to watch. They were here to build. The gray-bearded man ducked through the doorway and stopped short when he saw Walter standing there beside Colt. His eyes moved from Walter's bare feet to his weathered face, taking in everything without judgment. Then he extended his hand. Name's Preacher. You must be Walter. Walter hesitated. His fingers were trembling, but he forced himself to reach out and take the offered hand. I am. Good. Because you and I need to talk. About what? Preacher smiled. It was a hard smile, the kind earned through years of rough roads and rougher decisions. About what kind of shop you want us to build. Walter felt something crack open in his chest. Something that had been locked away for 12 years behind walls of shame and silence and defeat. I can't pay you back, he said. Any of you. I've got nothing. You've got $47, Preacher said. I spent that last night. I know. Preacher's grip tightened. That's why we're here. A man who gives his last dollar to a stranger doesn't need to pay us back. He already paid it forward. The thunder of engines grew louder. Through the broken windows, Walter could see the street filling with bikes, more than he'd ever seen in one place in his entire life. And every single one of them had come for him. "I don't understand," he said again, his voice barely a whisper now. Preacher released his hand and turned to face the gathering crowd of bikers. "You don't have to understand, brother. You just have to let us work." He raised his voice to carry across the lot. "Listen up. We've got 24 hours to turn this pile of rubble into something worth standing in. I want crews on the roof, crews on the walls, crews on the floor. If you've got a trade, use it. If you don't find someone who does and carry their tools, nobody stops until the job is done." Another roar from the assembled riders, and then they moved. Like a tide of leather and chrome, they swept into the building and began to tear down what remained of the old walls. Boards that had been rotting for a decade came crashing down. Debris was hauled out in armfuls and piled at the edge of the lot. The sound of hammers and drills filled the air like a symphony of second chances. Walter stood frozen in the middle of it all, watching men he'd never met fight to give him back what the world had taken. And for the first time in 12 years, he felt something stir in his chest that he'd long since given up on. Hope. It was small, fragile, barely more than an ember. But it was there, and it was growing. By noon, the street looked like a war zone of sawdust and sweat. Walter had lost count of how many hands had shaken his, how many strangers had clapped him on the shoulder and called him brother. His throat was raw from saying thank you, and his eyes burned from holding back tears he refused to let fall. He stood near what used to be the front entrance, watching a crew of 6 men hoist a fresh beam into place where the old one had rotted through years ago. The wood was new, pale, and clean-smelling of pine and possibility. "You just going to stand there all day?" Preacher appeared beside him, a hammer dangling from one massive hand. Sawdust clung to his gray beard like snow. "I don't know what else to do," Walter admitted. "Never been on this side of charity before." "This isn't charity." Preacher's voice was firm. "Charity is something you give to make yourself feel better. This is something different. This is family taking care of family. I'm not family. I'm just some old man who couldn't mind his own business." Preacher laughed, a deep rumble that came from somewhere in his chest. "That's exactly what makes you family. A man who sees a stranger in trouble and steps up anyway. That's the definition of brotherhood right there." A shout went up from somewhere inside the building. Metal clanged against metal, followed by a string of curses that would have made a sailor blush. "Sounds like they hit a snag," Preacher said. "Come on, let's see what's what." Walter followed him through the maze of workers and equipment. His bare feet had grown numb to the splinters and debris calloused after years of walking on harder surfaces than plywood and sawdust. They found the problem near the back wall. A massive iron safe sat half buried in the rubble, its door hanging open like a broken jaw. One of the younger bikers was nursing a bleeding hand where he'd caught it on the rusted edge. "What the hell is this thing?" the young man asked, sucking at the wound. Walter felt his heart stop. He knew that safe. He'd bought it second-hand from a bank in Memphis the year he opened the shop. Used it to store the petty cash and the important papers and the deed to the building that had meant everything to him. "That's mine," he said quietly. Everyone stopped moving. "Yours?" Preacher frowned. "I thought this place belonged to the bank." "It did, after they took it from me." Instead, Walter moved closer, his fingers reaching out to touch the cold iron. "But this safe was mine. I left it behind when they padlocked the doors. Didn't think there was any point in fighting for an empty box." "It's not empty now." The young biker pointed at something inside. Walter leaned closer, squinting into the darkness. Papers. A thick stack of them, yellow with age, covered in dust. He reached in and pulled them out. His hand started shaking before he'd read the first word. "What is it?" Colt had appeared at his shoulder, drawn by the sudden silence. Walter couldn't answer. His throat had closed up tight, choking off anything he might have tried to say. The papers were photographs, dozens of them. Pictures of his shop before the fire taken from angles that didn't make sense, unless you were specifically documenting something. And beneath the photographs, a letter. He recognized the handwriting immediately. It belonged to Thomas Mercer, the insurance investigator who'd destroyed his life. "Read it," Preacher said. "Out loud." Walter's hands trembled so badly he could barely hold the paper steady. But he forced himself to focus, forced the words to come out, even though they felt like broken glass in his throat. "To whom it may concern," he read. "I am writing this confession in the event that my conscience finally outweighs my cowardice. 12 years ago, I was assigned to investigate a fire at Brennan's Woodworks in rural Tennessee. The cause of the fire was electrical. A faulty wire in the main junction box. I documented this finding thoroughly." He had to stop, had to breathe, had to remind himself that this was real, that he wasn't dreaming this in some alley somewhere while the cold seeped into his bones. "Keep going," Colt said softly. Walter swallowed hard and continued. "However, I was instructed by my supervisor at Regional Mutual Insurance to alter my findings. The company was facing significant losses that quarter, and denying the claim would improve their numbers. I was promised a promotion and a substantial bonus if I cooperated. I was threatened with termination if I refused." The silence around him was absolute. Not even the hammers were falling now. "I changed my report. I declared the fire suspicious and recommended that the claim be denied pending criminal investigation. I knew Mr. Brennan was innocent. I knew my lies would destroy him. I did it anyway. I have lived with this guilt for 12 years. I can no longer carry it. By the time anyone reads this, I hope I will have found the courage to make things right. If not, at least the truth will be known." Walter lowered the paper. His whole body was shaking now. Not from cold, not from exhaustion, but from something deeper. Something that had been buried so long he'd forgotten it existed. Rage. Pure, white-hot, righteous rage. "That son of a bitch," Colt growled. He knew you were innocent, and he destroyed you anyway." "For a promotion," Preacher added, his voice low and dangerous. "For a bonus." Walter looked up at the men surrounding him. Bikers. Outlaws. Men the world had judged and discarded just like they'd judged and discarded him. And in that moment, he finally understood. This wasn't about charity. This wasn't about some viral video or internet fame or 300 strangers showing up to feel good about themselves. This was about justice. This was about standing up for a man who'd been knocked down and making sure he never had to stay down again. "Is that investigator still alive?" Preacher asked. "I don't know," Walter admitted. "I stopped following the news years ago. Stopped caring about anything except getting through one more day." Preacher pulled out his phone. "What was his name again?" "Thomas Mercer." The big man's fingers moved across the screen with surprising dexterity. A few seconds passed. Then his expression changed. "Found him," Preacher said. "Lives about 40 miles from here. Still works for the same insurance company, Regional Mutual. Senior claims adjuster now." "He got his promotion," Walter said bitterly. "Not for long." Preacher looked up from his phone. "You want to go pay him a visit?" Walter's first instinct was to say no, to let it go, to accept that the past was the past, and nothing could change what had already been done. But then he thought about his wife, about the hospital bed he couldn't afford, about the look on his son's face at the funeral, the accusation in his eyes, the way he'd turned his back and walked away without saying goodbye. All of it based on a lie. "Yes," he said, "I do." The ride took 45 minutes. Walter sat behind Colt on the big Harley arms wrapped around the younger man's waist, wind whipping past his ears. He'd never been on a motorcycle before, never trusted anything with only 2 wheels. But today, he trusted these men more than he'd trusted anyone in 12 years. They pulled up outside a neat suburban house with a trimmed lawn and a white picket fence, the kind of house that belonged in a magazine, the kind that said, "I made it to everyone who drove past." Thomas Mercer had built this life on Walter's bones. "How do you want to play this?" Colt asked as they dismounted. "I want to look him in the eye," Walter said. "I want him to know that I know. And then we let the truth do the rest." They walked up the path together, Walter in front, Colt a step behind. 20 other bikers fanned out across the lawn, their presence impossible to miss or ignore. Walter rang the doorbell. Footsteps inside. A shadow moving behind the frosted glass. The click of a lock being turned. The door opened. Thomas Mercer looked older than Walter expected. Softer around the middle grayer at the temples. The kind of man who'd aged comfortably, surrounded by all the things his lies had bought him. His smile lasted exactly half a second. "Can I help you?" "You don't remember me," Walter said. It wasn't a question. Mercer's eyes narrowed. He looked at Walter's bare feet, his ragged coat, his weathered face. Then something flickered in his expression. Recognition. Fear. "Brennan," he breathed. 12 years, Walter said. 12 years you let me think I was crazy. Let the whole town think I was a criminal. Let my wife die believing I'd failed her. Let my son walk away because he couldn't stand to look at his father, the fraud." Mercer's face had gone pale. His hand gripped the doorframe like he was trying to hold himself upright. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, you do." Walter held up the letter. "You wrote this. Your handwriting. Your confession. You left it in my safe like some kind of insurance policy against your own guilt. Where did you get that? Does it matter?" Walter stepped closer. "What matters is that it exists. What matters is that I can take it to a lawyer, to the police, to the news. What matters is that your whole comfortable little life is built on a lie, and now everybody's going to know it." Mercer's wife appeared behind him, a pleasant-looking woman with silver hair and worried eyes. "Tom, what's going on? Who are these people? Go back inside, Linda. But go back inside." The woman retreated, casting a frightened glance at the army of bikers on her lawn. Mercer turned back to Walter. The color had returned to his face, but it was the wrong color. The flush of a cornered animal looking for any way out. "What do you want?" he asked. "Money, I can write you a check. Name your price." "I don't want your money." "Then what?" Walter looked at this man who had stolen everything from him. The shop, the reputation, the wife, the son. 12 years of sleeping in alleys and eating from dumpsters and walking barefoot through winter streets because the world had decided he wasn't worth saving. "I want you to tell the truth." "The truth?" Mercer laughed, but there was no humor in it. "The truth won't give you back your shop. It won't bring your wife back from the dead. It won't make your son love you again. Maybe not, but it'll give me something I haven't had in 12 years. What's that? Peace." Mercer stared at him for a long moment. Then his shoulders slumped, and all the fight seemed to drain out of him at once. "You know what happens if I confess," he said quietly. "I lose everything. My job, my pension, my reputation. Linda will leave me. My kids won't speak to me. Everything I've built will be gone." "Good." The word came from Colt, standing just behind Walter's shoulder. Mercer flinched like he'd been struck. You don't understand, he pleaded. I was just following orders. They would have fired me if I hadn't done what they said. I had a family to support, bills to pay. I didn't have a choice. You always have a choice, Walter said. You just made the wrong one. He turned and started walking back toward the bikes. Brennan, wait. He didn't stop. What are you going to do with that letter? Walter paused at the edge of the lawn, looked back over his shoulder at the man who had destroyed his life. The same thing you should have done 12 years ago. The right thing. They rode back to the shop in silence. Walter's mind was churning, processing everything that had happened in the last 24 hours. The grocery store, the video, the bikers, the letter, the look on Thomas Mercer's face when he realized his sins had finally caught up with him. It should have felt good, satisfying, like justice finally being served after 12 years of waiting. But all Walter felt was tired and empty, and unsure what came next. When they pulled back into the lot, the shop had transformed. The frame was complete now, walls rising where there had been only rubble. The roof was half finished, fresh shingles gleaming in the afternoon sun. And standing in the middle of it all, surrounded by bikers and tools and sawdust, was a woman Walter had never seen before. She was young, late 20s, maybe early 30s. Dark hair pulled back in a ponytail, clipboard clutched to her chest, looking around at the chaos with an expression caught somewhere between bewilderment and awe. "Who's that?" Walter asked as Colt cut the engine. "No idea. Let's find out." They walked over together. The woman spotted them coming and straightened up, squaring her shoulders like she was preparing for battle. "Are you Walter Brennan?" "I am." "My name is Rachel Vance. I'm a reporter with Channel 9 News. I'd like to interview you about what happened at the grocery store and about all of this." She gestured at the construction around them. "I don't do interviews." "Mr. Brennan, your story has been viewed over 10 million times now. People want to know more about you. They want to know who you are and how you ended up in this situation." "Why?" The question seemed to catch her off guard. "Because it's a good story. A man with nothing gives everything for a stranger, and now hundreds of people are coming together to help him. That's the kind of thing people need to hear right now." Walter shook his head. "I'm not a story. I'm just an old man who made a choice. That's all." "But leave him alone." Preacher had appeared beside them, arms crossed, expression unreadable. The man said no. "That means no." Rachel Vance held her ground. "I understand your hesitation, but there's something you should know. I've been doing some digging. Into your case. Into the fire. Into the insurance investigation." Walter felt something clench in his chest. "What did you find? Thomas Mercer isn't the only one who lied. The whole thing was orchestrated. Regional Mutual had a policy back then. Deny as many claims as possible, especially the small ones. They figured people like you couldn't afford to fight back." "I knew that already. But did you know they're still doing it? Different adjusters, different cases, but the same playbook. I found 6 other people in this county alone who lost everything because Regional Mutual decided their claims weren't worth paying." The words hit Walter like a punch to the gut. 6 other people. 6 other lives destroyed. 6 other families torn apart by the same lies that had ruined him. "Why are you telling me this?" he asked. "Because I want to help. I want to tell your story and their stories and blow this whole thing wide open. But I can't do that without you. You're the proof that this company destroys people and walks away clean. You're the face that can make people care." Walter looked around at the bikers working on his shop, at Colt standing beside him with his arms crossed, at Preacher watching Rachel with the cautious eyes of a man who'd learned never to trust anyone who carried a microphone. "I need to think about it," he said finally. "That's fair?" Rachel pulled a card from her pocket and pressed it into his hand. "My number. Call me when you're ready." She walked away, heels clicking against the concrete. Colt watched her go. You trust her? I don't trust anyone, Walter said. But if she's telling the truth about those other people, then this is bigger than just me. What are you going to do? Walter looked down at the card in his hand. Then he looked up at his shop, rising from the ashes like something he'd stopped believing was possible. I'm going to find out if she's lying, he said. And if she's not, I'm going to burn that insurance company to the ground. The sun was starting to set when the black sedan pulled into the lot. Walter saw it first. A car that looked expensive and out of place among the motorcycles and pickup trucks. The windows were tinted dark, impossible to see through. Preacher moved to stand beside him. You expecting company? No. Then stay back. Let us handle this. The driver's door opened. A man in a tailored suit stepped out, adjusting his tie like he was about to walk into a boardroom instead of a construction site. He looked around at the bikers with barely concealed disdain. I'm looking for Walter Brennan. Nobody moved. I know he's here. I saw the news coverage. I need to speak with him. Preacher stepped forward. You can speak to me. What do you want? The man in the suit pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket. My name is Richard Hayes. I'm the Regional Director for Regional Mutual Insurance. I've been authorized to offer Mr. Brennan a settlement. The word hung in the air like smoke. A settlement? Preacher repeated. Correct. In exchange for his silence regarding certain historical claims, we're prepared to offer a substantial sum, enough to complete this construction project and provide for his needs for the foreseeable future. Walter pushed past Preacher before anyone could stop him. You're offering to pay me to shut up. Hayes smiled the cold smile of a man who was used to buying whatever he wanted. I'm offering you the opportunity to move forward, to put the past behind you, to focus on rebuilding your life instead of relitigating old grievances. Old grievances. Walter's voice was dangerously quiet. You call destroying my life an old grievance. I understand you're emotional, Mr. Brennan, but I'm offering you a practical solution to a practical problem. This lawsuit you're considering, it would take years, cost you money you don't have, and in the end there's no guarantee you'd win. I'm not considering a lawsuit. Hayes's smile flickered. Then what are you considering? Walter looked at this man in his expensive suit, standing in the middle of a construction site, surrounded by bikers who would break him in half if Walter gave the word. I'm considering telling the truth, and watching your whole rotten company collapse when people find out what you've been doing for the last 20 years. The smile disappeared entirely. That would be extremely unwise, Mr. Brennan. Is that a threat? It's a reality check. You're a homeless man with no money, no resources, and no credibility. We have lawyers. We have connections. We have the ability to make your life very difficult. Colt moved to stand beside Walter. And we have 300 men who'd love nothing more than to show you what difficult really looks like. Hayes's face went pale. For the first time, he seemed to realize exactly how outnumbered he was. I'm leaving now, he said, backing toward his car. But this offer won't last forever. Think carefully before you make any decisions you can't take back. He got in the sedan and drove away. Walter watched the taillights disappear around the corner. Well, Preacher said finally, I guess we know which side the angels are on. Walter nodded slowly. The battle lines had been drawn, and for the first time in 12 years, he wasn't standing alone. The black sedan had barely disappeared when Walter's hands started shaking. Not from fear, from something older. Something that had been building pressure inside his chest for 12 years, like steam in a sealed pipe. You all right, old man? Colt's voice pulled him back from the edge. They came to my shop, Walter said quietly. The shop they destroyed, and they had the nerve to offer me money to stay quiet. That's how people like that operate. They think everyone has a price. Everyone does? Walter looked down at his bare feet, caked with sawdust and dirt. Mine just isn't measured in dollars. Preacher walked over phone, pressed to his ear. He was nodding, grunting responses to whoever was on the other end. When he hung up, his expression was grim. That was my contact at the county clerk's office. Regional Mutual just filed an emergency injunction to halt construction on this property. On what grounds? They're claiming the land is still technically theirs, saying the original foreclosure was never properly completed. Walter felt the ground shift beneath him. That's a lie. They took everything. I watched them do it. Doesn't matter what's true. What matters is what they can convince a judge to believe. If that injunction goes through, we have to stop building. Today. The bikers had stopped working. 200 men stood frozen with hammers and saws in their hands, waiting to hear what came next. How long until the injunction hearing? Colt asked. Tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock. Then we have tonight. Walter straightened up, squaring his shoulders in a way he hadn't done in years. We finish what we can before they try to stop us. Preacher studied him for a long moment. You sure about this? If we keep building and that injunction goes through, they could charge us with trespassing, criminal destruction of property. Half these men have records. They can't afford to go back inside. I'm not asking anyone to risk their freedom for me. You're not asking. Preacher turned to face the assembled bikers. But we're volunteering. Isn't that right, brothers? The roar that went up shook the half-finished walls. They worked through the night. Walter had never seen anything like it. Men who should have been enemies, who came from different chapters and different states and different walks of life, moved together like a single organism. Walls went up, wiring was run, pipes were fitted into place with a precision that would have made professional contractors jealous. And through it all, Walter worked alongside them. His hands remembered the motions even if his body had forgotten the strength. He held boards while others nailed. He fetched tools when they were needed. He swept sawdust and carried trash, and did everything he could to contribute to the miracle taking shape around him. At 3 a.m., Colt found him sitting on an overturned bucket, staring at the wall where his workbench would go. You should rest. Big day tomorrow. Can't sleep. Nerves, memories. Walter rubbed his eyes with the back of his hand. I used to work through the night all the time. Back when the shop was mine, there was always one more order to finish, one more piece to sand, one more customer to satisfy. You miss it. Every day. He looked up at Colt. You know what the worst part was? After the fire, after they accused me of fraud, I could have fought back. I had friends. People who knew me. People who could have vouched for my character. What happened? They believed the lie. Walter's voice cracked. Every single one of them. The moment that insurance investigator published his report, they all just accepted it. Didn't ask questions. Didn't wonder if maybe there was another explanation. They just looked at me different. Like I was someone they'd never really known. Colt sat down on the concrete floor, back against the wall, legs stretched out in front of him. I know that feeling. Your prison time? 8 years for aggravated assault. I was protecting my sister from her boyfriend. He was hitting her, had been for months. One night I walked in, and he had her by the throat. I did what I had to do. That doesn't sound like assault. That sounds like self-defense. Try telling that to a jury who sees the patches on my vest. Colt shook his head. Prosecutor painted me as a violent criminal looking for any excuse to hurt someone. My sister was too scared to testify. His family had money, mine didn't. 8 years. Did she get away from him? Eventually. After I was locked up, he went after her again. Broke her arm. That time there were witnesses. He got 18 months. 18 months for breaking her arm. You got 8 years for saving her life. Justice isn't always just, brother. They sat together in silence for a while. The sounds of construction had faded, as more men took breaks, catching whatever sleep they could before dawn. "What made you decide to help me?" Walter asked finally. "That night in the grocery store. You could have just taken the groceries and walked away." "I could have." Colt was quiet for a moment. "But something in your eyes, the way you looked at those people who were judging me, it wasn't anger. It wasn't pity. It was recognition. Like you knew exactly what I was feeling because you'd felt it yourself 1,000 times." "I had. I know that now. But even then, before I knew your story, I could see it. And when you stepped up with your last dollar, I thought this is what it's supposed to look like. This is what the world could be if people just gave a damn about each other." Walter felt something warm spread through his chest. Not hope. Something stronger. Purpose. "We're going to win tomorrow," he said. "You don't know that." "Yes, I do." He stood up, joints protesting, muscles aching. "Because I'm not fighting for myself anymore. I'm fighting for everyone they did this to. Every person that company destroyed and threw away. Every life they ruined for their quarterly numbers. That's a lot of weight to carry." "Then it's a good thing I'm not carrying it alone." Dawn came too fast. The shop wasn't finished, but it was close. The roof was complete. The walls were standing. The windows were in place. It looked like a building again. It looked like something worth fighting for. Rachel Vance arrived at 7 a.m. with a camera crew. "I found them," she said, breathless with excitement. "The other victims. 6 families, just like I said. And they're willing to talk." All of them, plus 3 more I didn't know about. 9 families total. 9 people who lost everything because Regional Mutual decided their claims weren't worth paying. Walter felt his heart rate spike. "And they'll go on record." "Already have. I've got interviews, documents, internal emails that were leaked by a former employee. This story is going to blow the roof off that company." "When does it air?" "Tonight, 6 o'clock news. But I need your interview first. I need you to be the face of this story." Walter looked at Colt, at Preacher, at the hundreds of bikers who had given up their time, their money, their freedom to help a stranger. "I'll do it," he said. "But not here, at the courthouse, right before the hearing." Rachel's eyes widened. "That's perfect. Absolutely perfect." The courthouse steps were packed by 8:45. Word had spread through the town like wildfire. The homeless man from the video was fighting the insurance company that had destroyed him. 300 bikers were standing by his side, and a news crew was there to capture every moment. Walter stood at the bottom of the steps, surrounded by leather vests and chrome, facing a crowd that had once turned its back on him. Some of them wouldn't meet his eyes. Others stared openly, curiosity mixed with something that might have been shame. Rachel positioned her camera crew and held up her microphone. "Mr. Brennan, can you tell us what brings you here today?" Walter took a deep breath. His voice, when it came out, was steadier than he expected. 12 years ago, I lost everything. My business, my reputation, my wife, my son. All because an insurance company decided it was cheaper to call me a criminal than to pay a legitimate claim. He held up the letter. "This is a confession from the man who lied. Thomas Mercer, the investigator who destroyed my life, wrote this and left it in my safe. He admits that the fire was accidental. He admits that he was ordered to change his report. He admits that he knew I was innocent and destroyed me anyway." A murmur rippled through the crowd. "But this isn't just about me. This is about the 9 other families in this county who suffered the same fate. This is about a company that has been defrauding its customers for decades while hiding behind lawyers and accountants and threats." His voice rose. "They came to my shop yesterday, offered me money to stay quiet, Told me I couldn't win. Told me I was just a homeless man with no resources and no credibility. He looked directly into the camera. They were wrong. I'm not alone. I have 300 brothers standing beside me. I have a reporter who believed me when nobody else would, and I have the truth. He lowered the letter. That's more powerful than anything they can buy. The crowd erupted. Inside the courthouse, the hearing was chaos. Regional Mutual's lawyers had expected a routine proceeding, a quick injunction against a homeless man with no legal representation. Rubber stamp move on, problem solved. Instead, they found themselves facing a courtroom packed with bikers, a news camera recording every word, and a judge who was not happy about having his morning disrupted. Your Honor, this is highly irregular, the lead attorney protested. The defendant doesn't even have legal counsel. I do now. A woman's voice cut through the noise. Walter turned to see a sharply dressed attorney pushing through the crowd. She was mid-50s, silver-streaked hair, the kind of presence that commanded attention. Margaret Chen, Your Honor. I've been retained to represent Mr. Brennan. By whom? By 27 law firms across 3 states who saw the news coverage and decided pro bono work was back in fashion. She smiled. Also by a crowdfunding campaign that raised $200,000 in the last 6 hours. The regional mutual attorneys exchanged panicked glances. Your Honor, we request a continuance to prepare for this unexpected development. Denied. The judge leaned forward. You filed an emergency injunction demanding immediate relief. Now you want to delay. That's not how this works. Present your case or withdraw it. Your Honor, present your case. The attorney swallowed hard and opened his briefcase. But before he could pull out his documents, Margaret Chen was already on her feet. If it please the court, I'd like to submit evidence that the plaintiff's claim to this property is fraudulent. Objection. On what grounds? She can't just introduce evidence without, this is an emergency hearing, counselor. Standard discovery rules don't apply. The judge waved his hand. Continue, Ms. Chen. Margaret walked to the bench and handed the judge a thick folder. Your Honor, inside you'll find the original foreclosure documents from 12 years ago. You'll also find the deed transfer, the bank's certification of completion, and the county recorder's stamp showing that Regional Mutual's acquisition of this property was finalized in 2013. She turned to face the opposing attorneys. The property they're claiming was never properly transferred to them has been in their name for over a decade. They've been paying property taxes on it. They've been listing it as an asset on their quarterly reports. Their own documents prove that this injunction is based on a lie. The judge examined the papers. His expression darkened. Is this true, counselor? Regional Mutual's lead attorney was sweating. Your Honor, there may have been some confusion in our filing. Confusion. You filed a fraudulent claim in my courtroom, and you want to call it confusion. I apologize for any misunderstanding. The injunction is denied. The judge slammed his gavel. And I'm referring this matter to the district attorney for investigation into potential perjury charges. Your Honor, please. Get out of my courtroom. The crowd exploded into cheers. Walter stood frozen, unable to process what had just happened. They had won. After 12 years of losing, they had actually won. Colt grabbed his shoulder. You hear that, old man? It's over. You won. It's not over. Walter shook his head slowly. It's just beginning. He was right. The news story aired at 6 p.m. that evening. Rachel Vance had put together a masterpiece. Walter's story told in his own words. The confession letter read aloud by Thomas Mercer himself, who had apparently decided that cooperation was better than prosecution. The interviews with 9 families who had suffered the same fate. and the footage of 300 bikers working through the night to rebuild what had been destroyed. By 7 p.m., the story had gone national. By 8 p.m., it was international. By 9 p.m., Regional Mutual's stock price had dropped 40%, and the CEO had announced his resignation. By midnight, the state attorney general had launched a formal investigation into the company's practices spanning 2 decades. And through it all, Walter sat on the porch of his almost finished shop, surrounded by men who had become his brothers, watching the world finally learn the truth. "How does it feel?" Colt asked, settling down beside him. "Strange." Walter stared at the street, still packed with motorcycles, even though most of the work was done. "I spent 12 years thinking nobody cared, that the truth didn't matter, that I was just going to fade away and nobody would ever know what really happened. And now I can't stop thinking about all the years I wasted being invisible." Colt was quiet for a moment. "You weren't invisible, Walter. You were surviving. There's a difference." "Maybe." "No, maybe about it. You think any of us would be here if you hadn't survived long enough to walk into that grocery store? You think any of this would be happening if you'd given up somewhere along the way?" Walter considered this. 12 years of cardboard beds and dumpster meals and walking barefoot through winter streets. All the times he'd thought about ending it. All the times he'd wondered if anyone would even notice if he did. "I almost quit," he admitted. "More times than I can count." "But you didn't." "No, I didn't." "Why not?" Walter thought about it for a long moment. "Because somewhere deep down I still believed I was worth something. Even when nobody else did. Even when I couldn't prove it to anyone, including myself. That's not almost quitting, brother. That's fighting. Every single day that's fighting." The words settled into Walter's chest like stones finding their place in a river. He had been fighting, all along. Even when it felt like giving up, even when it looked like surrender, he had been fighting just to exist in a world that wanted him to disappear. And now finally the world was seeing him. The phone call came at 2 a.m. Walter was dozing on a cot someone had set up in the back of the shop when Preacher shook him awake. "You need to take this." "Who is it?" "Just take it." Walter pressed the phone to his ear. "Hello?" Silence on the other end. Then a voice he hadn't heard in 12 years. "Dad." His heart stopped. "Michael." "I saw the news." His son's voice was thick, choked with something that sounded like tears. "I saw what they did to you, what they really did to you." "Michael, I'm sorry." The words came out broken, jagged. "I'm so sorry. I believed them. I believed all of it. I thought you were guilty. I thought you let Mom die because you'd rather save yourself than admit what you'd done. You were young. You didn't know. I should have known. I should have trusted you. You were my father and I just walked away. I let you become homeless. I let you suffer for 12 years while I built a life pretending you didn't exist." Walter felt tears streaming down his face. He didn't try to stop them. "It wasn't your fault." "It was. It absolutely was. No." Walter's voice was firm now. "You were a kid who lost his mother and couldn't make sense of anything. The people who lied to you, they're the ones at fault. Not you. Never you." Silence on the line. "Michael, are you still there?" "I'm here." A shuddering breath. "I'm on a plane right now. I land in 3 hours. I need to see you. I need to look you in the eye and tell you I'm sorry in person." Walter couldn't speak. The words wouldn't come. "Dad, I'll be here." His voice cracked. "I'm not going anywhere." "I love you, Dad." "I love you too, son." The line went dead, and Walter sat there in the darkness, phone pressed to his chest, tears flowing freely for the first time in 12 years. He had lost everything. And now, piece by piece, it was coming back to him. Preacher appeared in the doorway. "Good news. The best." Walter wiped his face with the back of his hand. "My son's coming home." "Then we'd better make sure this place is finished before he gets here." "It doesn't have to be finished." "Yeah, it does," Preacher grinned. "A man should be standing in a proper house when his boy comes back, not some half-built construction site surrounded by old bikers." He turned and bellowed into the darkness. "Listen up, brothers. We've got 3 hours to finish this shop. The owner's son is coming home, and we're going to make damn sure he sees what his father built." The response was immediate. Lights flicked on. Engines roared to life. Men who had been sleeping on bedrolls and in truck cabs came pouring back into the building with tools in their hands. Walter watched them work these strangers who had become family. 3 hours. 3 hours until his son walked through that door. 3 hours until the last piece of his shattered life fell back into place. He picked up a hammer and joined them. The last nail went in at 5:47 a.m. Walter drove it himself, sinking the head flush with the wood in a single clean stroke. His arms burned, his back screamed. His bare feet had gone numb hours ago, but the shop was finished. Preacher stepped back and surveyed their work. "Not bad for 300 outlaws and one stubborn old man." "Not bad at all." The building stood solid and true, where ruins had crumbled just 3 days before. Fresh paint gleamed in the early morning light. New windows reflected the rising sun, and above the door a hand-carved sign proclaimed what Walter had stopped believing was possible. "Brennan's Woodworks open again." "Your boy's going to lose his mind when he sees this," Colt said. Walter couldn't respond. His throat had closed up tight, choking off everything except the thundering of his own heart. His son was coming home. After 12 years of silence, 12 years of wondering if Michael even remembered he had a father, his boy was coming home. "What time does his flight land?" Preacher asked. 6:15. "Airport's 40 minutes from here. You should get going." Walter shook his head. "I can't leave. What if something happens? What if Regional Mutual sends someone else? What if—" "Walter." Preacher's hand landed heavy on his shoulder. "Nothing is going to happen to this shop. You've got 300 men standing guard. Nobody gets through us. Nobody. But go get your son." Colt was already walking toward his bike. "Come on, old man. I'll drive." The ride to the airport was the longest 40 minutes of Walter's life. Every mile that passed felt like a year. Every stoplight was an eternity. His mind raced through 1,000 different scenarios, 1,000 different ways this reunion could go wrong. What if Michael had changed his mind? What if the apology on the phone was just guilt? Talking and seeing his father in person would bring back all the old anger. What if Walter opened his arms and his son walked right past him? "You're thinking too loud," Colt said over the roar of the engine. "I can hear it from here." "I don't know what to say to him." "You don't have to say anything. Just be there." "That doesn't feel like enough." "It's everything." Colt's voice was firm. "Trust me. When I got out of prison, all I wanted was someone waiting for me on the other side of those gates. Someone who showed up. That's all your boy needs right now. Just show up." The airport was chaos. Walter hadn't been inside a building this big in years. The noise, the crowds, the constant announcements, it all crashed over him like a wave. He felt small, out of place. Like everyone could see exactly what he was just by looking at him. A homeless man in borrowed clothes, bare feet, hidden beneath a pair of boots someone had found in the back of their truck. "Flight 447 from Los Angeles has arrived at Gate 12. His heart stopped. "That's him," Colt said. "Come on." They pushed through the crowd toward the arrivals area. Walter's legs felt like they belonged to someone else. His vision narrowed until all he could see was the corridor where passengers were starting to emerge. Business travelers with rolling suitcases, families reuniting with hugs and tears, college kids heading home for the holidays. And then, Michael. He was taller than Walter remembered, broader in the shoulders, gray at his temples even though he was only 38. He carried himself like a man who had built a successful life, a confident life, a life that had no room for a homeless father sleeping behind laundromats. But his eyes were exactly the same as the little boy who used to stand on tiptoes to peek into the supply shed. The little boy who would fall asleep in the workshop, lulled by the rhythm of his father's sanding. The little boy who believed Walter Brennan could fix anything. Their eyes met across the crowded terminal. Michael stopped walking. Walter stopped breathing. For a moment that stretched into forever, neither of them moved. The crowd flowed around them like water around stones, oblivious to the 12 years of silence and pain and regret that hung in the air between father and son. Then Michael's face crumpled. He crossed the distance between them in 5 long strides, dropped his bag, and wrapped his arms around his father so tight Walter felt his ribs creak. "I'm sorry." Michael's voice broke against Walter's shoulder. "I'm so sorry, Dad. I'm so sorry." "It's okay." "No, it's not. It's not okay. I abandoned you." "You're here now." Walter held his son like he was afraid he might disappear. "That's all that matters. You're here now." They stood there in the middle of the airport, 2 grown men crying in each other's arms, while travelers streamed past and the world kept spinning and nothing existed except this moment of impossible grace. Colt stood a few feet away, arms crossed, trying very hard not to show that his own eyes had gone suspiciously bright. The ride back to the shop was quieter. Michael sat behind Walter on Colt's bike arms wrapped around his father's waist, the same way Walter had held on to Colt just days before. Neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. 12 years of silence couldn't be erased with words, but it could start to heal with presence, with proximity, with the simple act of showing up. When they turned onto Harper Street, Michael's grip tightened. "Dad, what is that?" Walter couldn't answer. He was too busy trying not to fall apart. The shop stood proud and new at the end of the block. The sign gleamed in the morning sun. And lined up in front of it 300 bikers in leather vests stood in perfect formation engines, idling chrome catching the light. Colt pulled to a stop at the edge of the crowd. Michael dismounted first. His legs seemed unsteady, his eyes wide as he took in the scene. "They did this?" he asked. "All of them, all of them." Walter climbed off the bike, his body aching in places he didn't know could ache. 300 strangers who decided a homeless man's last $47 was worth more than everything they were doing before. Why? Because I helped one of them when nobody else would. Michael stared at his father. "You haven't changed. After everything they did to you, after everything you lost, you're still the same man who gave away tools to people who couldn't afford them." "That man's all I know how to be." Preacher approached his massive frame, cutting through the crowd like a ship through waves. He extended his hand to Michael. "You must be the son." "Michael Brennan." "Good to meet you." Preacher's handshake was firm but brief. "Your father's one hell of a man. You should be proud of him." "I am." Michael's voice cracked. "I always was. I just forgot for a while." "We all forget sometimes. What matters is remembering." The crowd parted as Walter and Michael walked toward the shop. Every biker they passed nodded in greeting. Some reached out to clap Walter on the shoulder. Others simply stood in respectful silence, bearing witness to a moment that transcended whatever had brought them here. At the door, Walter stopped. His hand hovered over the handle, trembling. "What's wrong?" Michael asked. "I'm afraid to go inside." "Why?" "Because once I do, it's real, and real things can be taken away." Michael put his hand over his father's. "Not this time. You've got too many people watching your back now." Together, they pushed open the door. The shop was beautiful. Not fancy, not modern, just honest and solid and built by hands that gave a damn. A workbench ran along the back wall, exactly where Walter's old one used to sit. Tools hung in neat rows on pegboard walls. A small office space had been carved out in the corner, complete with a desk and a filing cabinet and a computer that looked brand new. And on the workbench waiting for him sat a single project. A child's rocking chair, half finished. Walter approached it slowly, running his fingers over the smooth wood. Who started this? Colt did. Preacher had followed them inside. Said every shop needs a project in progress. Keeps the spirit alive. "It's for my granddaughter," Michael said quietly. "I have a daughter. Her name is Sarah. She's 7. Walter's hand froze on the wood. "I have a granddaughter." "You have a granddaughter." Michael's eyes were wet again. "And she's been asking about you ever since I told her where I was going. She wants to meet her grandpa, if you're willing." The world tilted sideways. Walter had prepared himself for many things. For rejection, for anger, for the long, hard work of rebuilding a relationship that had been shattered for over a decade. He had not prepared himself for this. "I don't know how to be a grandfather," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I barely know how to be a person anymore." "You learn." Michael stepped closer. "The same way you learned to survive 12 years on the street. One day at a time. One moment at a time. You just show up and let it happen. What if I mess it up? Then we figure it out together. That's what family does." Family. The word hit Walter like a physical blow. He hadn't had a family in so long he'd forgotten what it felt like, forgotten the weight of it, the responsibility, the terrifying joy of being connected to something larger than yourself. "I'd like that," he said finally. "I'd like to meet her. She's flying in tomorrow, with her mother. They wanted to give us time to reconnect first, but they couldn't wait long." Tomorrow. Walter looked around the shop. His shop, built by strangers who had become brothers, filled with tools and possibilities and the smell of fresh lumber and the promise of work to be done. Then he looked at his son, standing there with tears on his cheeks and hope in his eyes. And he realized something he hadn't understood until this moment. He wasn't rebuilding a business. He was rebuilding a life. The dedication ceremony started at noon. Rachel Vance was there with her camera crew broadcasting live. Reporters from 3 other stations had shown up, drawn by the story that had captured the nation's attention. A crowd had gathered on the street, townspeople who had watched from a distance, now stepping forward to witness history. Preacher called for silence. 300 bikers fell quiet as one. "Most of you know why we're here," Preacher said, his voice carrying across the crowd. "But for those who don't, let me tell you a story." He gestured toward Walter. 4 days ago, this man walked into a grocery store with nothing but the clothes on his back and $47 in his pocket. He saw a stranger being accused of something he didn't do. He saw a world ready to throw that stranger away without a second thought. Preacher paused. And instead of walking past like everyone else, he stepped up, gave away every dollar he had to someone he'd never met. Not because he expected anything in return, not because he thought it would change his life, but because it was the right thing to do. The crowd was absolutely silent. That's what brotherhood means. Not patches, not colors, not what chapter you ride with or how many miles you've got on your bike. Brotherhood is seeing someone in trouble and doing something about it. It's standing up when the world tells you to sit down. It's being there for people who have nobody else. He turned to face Walter directly. Walter Brennan didn't ask for any of this. He just wanted to help a stranger buy some groceries. But sometimes the smallest act of kindness starts a chain reaction that nobody can stop. Preacher reached into his vest and pulled out a leather jacket. Not a club vest, but something else. Something new. On behalf of every chapter represented here today, I want to present this to you. It's not a membership. You don't have to ride. You don't have to come to meetings. You don't owe us anything. He handed the jacket to Walter. On the back, stitched in white thread, were 3 words, Brotherhood Keeper. "This is what you've earned," Preacher said. "This is what you are. From now until the day they put you in the ground, you've got 300 brothers who will answer any call, any time, any place. You're family now, Walter Brennan, and we don't forget our own." The roar that went up shook the windows of the newly finished shop. Walter stood there, jacket in his hands, tears streaming down his face. He tried to speak. Couldn't. Tried again. "I don't deserve this," he finally managed. "You're right." Colt stepped forward, grinning. "You deserve better, but this is what we've got." Laughter rippled through the crowd. Walter put on the jacket. It fit like it had been made for him. Maybe it had been. The party lasted well into the evening. Someone had set up a grill in the parking lot. Someone else had brought coolers full of drinks. Music played from speakers mounted on the back of a pickup truck, old rock and roll, that made the older bikers nod along, while the younger ones tried not to look bored. Walter sat on the porch of his shop, watching it all unfold. His son sat beside him. "This is insane," Michael said, shaking his head. "A week ago you were sleeping behind a laundromat. Now you've got a shop, a news crew following you around, and 300 bikers who'd probably go to war for you. Strange how life works." "It's more than strange. It's a miracle." "Maybe." Walter leaned back in his chair. "Or maybe it's just what happens when you stop waiting for someone else to fix things and start doing it yourself." "Is that what you did, fixed things yourself?" "No." Walter smiled. "I just paid for some groceries. Everyone else did the fixing." "You know that's not true." "It's true enough." Michael was quiet for a moment. "Mom would have loved this. Seeing you here. Seeing the shop rebuilt. She always believed in you, even when things got bad." Walter's smile faded. "I know she did. I wish I'd had her faith. You had your own pain to deal with. Losing her was hard on all of us. That's not an excuse." "No, but it's an explanation. There's a difference." Walter looked at his son. "I spent 12 years being angry at the world for what it did to me. Angry at the insurance company. Angry at the town. Angry at everyone who turned their backs. But I was never angry at you. Why not? Because you were hurting too, and hurt people make hurt decisions. I understood that even when I was sleeping on cardboard and wondering if I'd wake up in the morning." Michael's eyes filled with tears. How could you understand that when I abandoned you? Because you're my son." Walter reached over and took his hand. "And a father's love doesn't come with conditions. It doesn't expire. It doesn't care about 12 years of silence or harsh words or closed doors. It just is. Dad, I love you, Michael. I never stopped. I never will. And whatever happens next, I want you to know that getting you back is worth more than this shop, more than the news coverage, more than 300 bikers with good intentions. You're my boy. That's everything." Michael couldn't speak. He just held his father's hand and let the tears fall. They sat together on the porch as the sun set, and the party wound down, and the world kept turning around them. Father and son, broken and healing, lost and found. The crowd began to disperse around 10 p.m. Bikes roared to life one by one, headlights cutting through the darkness as riders headed back to their own lives. Some would drive through the night to reach home. Others would find motels along the way. All of them would carry this story with them, adding it to the collection of moments that defined who they were. Preacher was one of the last to leave. He stood with Walter at the edge of the lot, watching the final bikes disappear around the corner. "What happens now?" Walter asked. "Now you live your life. Open your shop, make furniture, spoil your granddaughter, be the man you always were. And you? I've got a chapter to run, meetings to attend, old men to keep in line." Preacher grinned. "Same as always. Will I see you again?" "Count on it. Brothers don't just disappear." He extended his hand. "It's been an honor, Walter Brennan." "The honor's mine." They shook hands. Then Preacher climbed on his bike, fired up the engine, and roared off into the night. Walter stood there for a long time after he was gone. The street was quiet now. The shop stood solid and dark behind him. His son was inside calling his wife to tell her about the day. And for the first time in 12 years, Walter Brennan was at peace. He thought about the grocery store, the flickering lights, the biker with his head bowed in shame, the cashier reaching for the phone to call security. He thought about the $47 he'd laid on that counter. Every cent he had in the world. It had seemed like nothing at the time. A small gesture. A moment of compassion in a world that had shown him none. But it had been everything. That single act of kindness had unlocked something bigger than he could have imagined. It had brought 300 strangers to his door. It had rebuilt his shop from the ashes. It had exposed a corrupt company and vindicated his name. It had brought his son home after 12 years of silence. All because he'd refused to look away when someone needed help. The door opened behind him. "Dad," Michael's voice was soft. "You coming inside?" Walter turned to face his son, his shop, his future. "Yeah," he said. "I'm coming home." He walked through the door and closed it behind him. The night wrapped itself around the little building on Harper Street like a protective embrace. The sign above the door caught the moonlight, each letter a promise written in wood and paint, and hope. Brennan's Woodworks open again. Somewhere out there, 300 engines rumbled through the darkness carrying the story of a barefoot man and his last $47 to every corner of the country. And somewhere inside, a father held his son and thought about the granddaughter he would meet tomorrow, the life he would rebuild, the future he had finally stopped being afraid to believe in. Because sometimes the smallest act of courage changes everything. Sometimes a single moment of kindness echoes across years and miles and broken hearts. And sometimes when you give away everything you have for someone you've never met, the world gives you back more than you ever dreamed possible. Walter Brennan had learned that truth the hard way. But he had learned it, and he would never forget.